Hi Kaz, how are you?
Hi Leo, I'm fine, thank you.
Great, good. Kaz, thanks for joining us. I've got a few questions for you today. We've had one question from a client regarding dividends. How important are these to you?
Well, they are important, yes, but many companies in the UK have cancelled their dividends recently. And in that experience we've had this year since March, that's been quite common. So cancelled dividends, deferred dividends, dividends that have just been omitted from UK companies has been the common trend we've seen. But we've not been concerned about that because we viewed it as sensible. So these companies have obviously been struggling in this coronavirus pandemic experience that we're having and the effect on the economy. And for those companies to keep their cash on their balance sheets is actually quite wise. Some companies have also made measures such as cutting executive salaries, furloughing staff, reducing bonuses or cancelling them completely, and also drawing down on their credit facilities. And all this is to maintain liquidity on the balance sheets. So in our view, this is a sensible move. We do expect those companies to return to paying dividends at some point, and we are obviously monitoring each company very closely to make sure that they are equipped to deal with this crisis as it still unfolds on an economic basis for them. But we're not overly concerned about the long term because we think they will recover. For an investor, of course, dividends are part of a total return that can also be generated by capital as well. And if you look at the total returns from the Courtiers Growth Fund since March, the fund is up 35% since the 23rd of March. And that is a return largely driven by capital growth. So taking your income from capital growth is not a bad thing either.
Great. Kaz, thanks. Scandals, stocks. So I've seen a lot of this scandal stuff, especially the Wirecard popping its head back up, and I've read some really messy stuff about there. So I wondered if you could tell us what's the latest and how do we avoid situations like this in our own stocks?
Yes, Wirecard is looking like it will be messy. If you cast your mind back to 2001, most people will remember Enron, which wasn't necessarily similar but has some similarities, a bankruptcy, auditors that failed to do their job properly. And of course, Enron resulted in 2 or 3 people going to prison, one of whom was only released last year, 18 years after the event. Now, Enron, it took really 10 years to conclude all the payback for all the creditors of Enron. So I think it's fair to say that the Wirecard scandal has some time to run. Marcus Braun, the ex-chief executive officer, was rearrested this week. He's been rearrested along with 3 or 4 other senior executives who were present in the business a few years ago, because the investigators have so far discovered that this started at least as early as 2015. So it's a multi-year accounting fraud involving cash balances that apparently did not exist, and that wasn't picked up by the auditor. And of course, shareholders have been burnt very heavily over this because the company has obviously filed for bankruptcy. So in terms of the Wirecard scandal specifically, this will go on. It will take a few years to resolve. Rather interestingly, the chief operating officer has actually gone missing. He is now described as one of the world's most wanted men, and it is reported that he's in hiding out in Russia with protection from Russian intelligence. So this really does have room to keep going. But for shareholders, you know, the end is not nigh. Creditors will be paid back over the course of time as assets are sold, and this can take time, as it did with Enron. But the pain has already been felt by shareholders. And we were fortunate enough not to hold any direct positions in Wirecard. To avoid these sort of frauds is very tricky, actually, because you know, for something that the auditors didn't spot, it's very hard to then suggest that analysts should spot it. But of course, the FT in this case made some allegations a good few years ago, and there were rumours around. Companies can enter into fraud, and that's why the role of an auditor is so important. But also, when we look at companies and analyse them, we're looking at trends. And when you see something that breaks from a trend, something that unusual happens, you want to be able to understand why that happens. So, you know, Wirecard had a sudden change in fortune, and as an investor, you'd want to know exactly why that is and understand the true reasons for it. So there is work to be done from an analyst perspective as well as from the auditor's perspective when you're trying to spot these types of companies that are subject to fraud.
And I wonder if this might be the subject of an interesting movie at some point in future years.
It probably will be, and certainly the German regulator is not going to get off lightly, because they've overseen this, and this was a company that was much lauded in Germany as their answer to technology, from an index that didn't have many tech stocks. The Germans love this stock, so the regulator is going to come in for some scrutiny too.
Wow. Thanks, Kaz. Is there anything else going on in the world that you can tell us about?
Well, there's plenty going on, Leo, and I think probably it would be remiss of me not to touch a little bit on the China-US, UK-China relationship at the moment, which is, I would say, fraught with some tension following the UK's decision to remove Huawei from its 5G network and remove it completely by 2027. So the UK sided with Japan, Australia and the US in its insistence of the removal of Huawei from its 5G network. And that sort of puts it with some of the big players, but not every country has followed suit. The Chinese didn't take this too well. And obviously on top of the issues with the new securities law in Hong Kong and some fractured relationships there, with Boris Johnson offering Hong Kongers who hold British overseas passports to be able to come to the UK, something that President Xi of China has categorically said we shouldn't mess with their business. And it's a similar situation with the US and China too. President Trump has got an election coming up. He wants to appear strong. President Xi doesn't want to appear weak in China either. The ongoing trade war, the recent issues with the closure of the consulate in Houston over allegations of 2 Chinese hackers stealing virus vaccine secrets from a local facility. And the Chinese probably going to retaliate. So there's a lot of tit for tat going on, if you like. There's certainly tensions still in the South China Sea, and Trump has stepped up efforts in the last week to defend some of the local nations, where China has been putting pressure on them not to fish in waters that were probably their right, but they're disputed waters. So there's a lot of tit for tat. There's a lot of diplomacy required to get to a resolution, and of course there's a lot of politics involved with the upcoming US election. So I think that looks very interesting. And one of the repercussions, of course, is just increased market volatility. And with Chinese stocks forming so much of the emerging markets index these days, just over 40%, there is a lot of pressure on Western investment managers to invest in Chinese companies. So there's going to be more scrutiny on China, and this will be interesting. And we will see increased stock market volatility because of all these tensions. So that is something we are keeping an eye on. The VIX index, which I've talked about before, and it measures stock market volatility, it has settled down a little bit since the spikes of March and April, but it has settled at a higher level than it was pre-COVID-19. And so that elevated market volatility is worth keeping an eye on, and we are very mindful to manage our assets whilst looking at this increased market volatility.
Great, Kaz, thank you. And just finally, I'd like to touch on a recent nomination. I understand you were nominated for the Professional Advisor Women in Financial Advice Awards 2020 for Woman of the Year in Investment. And out of 1,300 nominations, you've made it into the final 13.
Yeah, it's a great honour. I'm hugely privileged to have been nominated for this by somebody who is anonymous to me. So thank you to whoever nominated me. And I've been through the application process, and I'm delighted to be part of these awards and to have been shortlisted. I mentioned the work that Courtiers does with our young analysts in our team and mentoring those people, and also interns. And then I also mentioned some of the work I do outside Courtiers with local schools and universities, trying to encourage young women in particular, but young people in general, into careers in fund management. So it's an absolute pleasure to be part of these awards, and we'll have to wait till October to find out. So fingers crossed.
We'll look out for that, Kaz. It's a fantastic achievement. So congratulations, and well done for your work. Obviously, future generations are very important to us.
Thanks very much,
Our
Leo.
quality of tomorrow. Okay. Well, we'll leave it there. We'll get this ready, we'll get it out to clients, and I'll talk to you again soon.
Great, thank you.
All right, Kaz, take care.
Bye-bye.
Bye.